Welcome to the Amazon Investor Coalition podcast. Let's dive in.
I'm Chief Operating Officer of a nonprofit called Not for Sale. We do global work in a variety of countries around the world where people are facing exploitation or human trafficking. And the whole goal of our organization is to kind of interrupt that flow, figure out why people are being trafficked or exploited in the first place, and kind of put something into that to interrupt the cycle and prevent their exploitation later down the line. So we've done this in Romania, Amsterdam. We work in Uganda with refugees from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Vietnam, and Thailand. And one of the other places we work is the Peruvian Amazon. So let me see if I can share this presentation. Do I just go to, anyone know where I go to? Do I just do start share?
Yes.
Okay.
We see it.
Okay, great. So let's see here. Our work started in Lima, Peru, about 10 years ago now. And we were working with an organization called Veronica's House, where there was a lot of street children coming in that were being exploited in Peru. They were leaving their families for some reason. They were ending up on the streets in Lima, which is a huge city. We really couldn't figure out what was going on there. So we started digging around with local experts on the ground to see where these kids were coming from and why they were all ending up in this city. And what we found is that most of them were coming from the indigenous communities in the Amazon. So who are they? Where are they from? Why are they leaving in the first place? And what we're seeing is that there was a lot of exploitation in the Amazon itself. There was a lot of illegal gold mining, illegal logging, many issues there that were causing these kids to have no opportunities in their home communities. And so they were being forced to leave, and they were ending up in Lima and then getting trafficked or exploited on the street and ending up in this orphanage if they were lucky. A lot of them were not found and were just kind of ended up in really terrible situations. So what we started doing was figuring out who in the Amazon we could talk to understand what this cycle was all about. And we partnered with someone named Ricardo, who introduced us to this man, Martin. He's the one in the yellow shirt in the corner there. And Martin actually had a really interesting story. He himself had been in debt peonage with some of the loggers in the communities who were basically taking advantage of years and years of abuse to the indigenous communities and forcing them into the only work they could find, and then creating a cycle where the longer they worked for them, the poorer and more in debt they were. So Martin ended up owing a ton of money to his employer rather than being able to get enough money to go back to his community and start his own life. So what we started doing was figuring out what was preventing these communities from accessing marketplace in a healthy way. And one of the things that we found was that they had a natural resource called the Brazil nut that grows wildly and freely. It's not something that has to be agriculturally created. It has to be an old growth rainforest. But what's happening is that although the communities were able to get the Brazil nut off their own land, they didn't have access to taking it to marketplace. So middlemen were coming in to each community individually and undercutting them and kind of price gouging by pitting the communities against each other. So the price was getting lower and lower. So the communities weren't able to fully take advantage of this amazing resource they had that was actually getting a pretty high price in the market itself. So what we did, very first step, was we bought them a boat. This is the boat that you see here. It was about $250. And what it was able to do was get Martin to travel from community to community himself to create a co-op of all 7 communities. I think there were 7 at the time, maybe 8 or 9. And talk to them and say, hey, let's form something right now so that we're not getting these middlemen to come in and use us against each other. Let's set a price. And they were also able to use that boat to actually physically go upstream to the port town and sell the Brazil nuts directly themselves, just cutting out the middleman entirely. So what we saw just from buying that one boat was a huge increase in capacity for these communities to just take care of themselves, to be independent. It was literally $250 of philanthropic money that we put in there. And it had this massive return for the communities. And that was really exciting to us. We're like, okay, there must be something here. How else can we strategically inject capital so that these communities have access to everything that they need to do to create their own future and lives here, and they're not going to continue to work for illegal organizations, to get into debt peonage, to have their women and children be hurt and be sexually trafficked or trafficked in labor as well. So our next step, and this is all not for sale doing this. Not yet at any point is there a company. This is just a nonprofit that's doing this, and we're just using philanthropic dollars. So our next step was to figure out a way to like change the way that we do business. And we created what we called the Montara Circle. It was in Montara, California. And we invited a ton of people that we knew through Not for Sale that were already interested in ending trafficking in some kind. So Jack Dorsey was one of the invitees. There was a Major League Baseball player named Jeremy Apfel. And once you have a couple big names like that, we got a few more. So we had quite a bit of people there. And we said, okay, here's what's going on in the Amazon. Here's the strengths. Here's the weaknesses. Let's figure out what the opportunities are. Let's like think this through. And if we can create some sort of amazing idea today, we're going to go ahead and invest in it as Not for Sale. We're going to put equity into it and like, let's figure it out and let's incubate it and make it happen. And the idea that came out of that was called Smart Tea. As you guys know, there's a ton of herbs, nuts, amazing things in the Amazon that are used, like adaptogens, all sorts of great stuff that we thought we could maybe make a tea out of. And this was actually the idea of the Major League Baseball player, Jeremy Apfel, because he was drinking tea at the time. And he thought, why can't we just make this into a drink? And so our founder, David Batson, was like, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And the nonprofit went out there and started raising capital, acquiring talent, recruiting people, and we created a company that ended up being called Rebel. Rebel stands for Roots, Extracts, Berries, Bark, and Leaves, and it's a functional beverage, fully vegan, that incorporates a lot of this great stuff from the Amazon. And what we did when we built Rebel, because it was started by a nonprofit and it was codified by a nonprofit and architected by a nonprofit, we made it with all the intention, purpose, and mission of a nonprofit. So we built into the Rebel's bylaws an impact team, a supply chain code of conduct. Not for Sale has an ownership stake. We have a board seat in perpetuity. And this is the biggest one, 2.5% of all of their net revenue. So the purchase price of every bottle goes back to Not for Sale, so we can continue the cycle of using philanthropic dollars to start something like a social enterprise or a company like this that will interrupt these patterns of slavery that arise from lack of economic opportunity. So that was about 7 years ago. Now Rebel is a massive company. I'm sure you guys have seen it in Whole Foods or other places. I mean, once you've seen it once, you'll see it everywhere. We now source 70 ingredients from 30 countries. They're having a huge impact in Peru. And I'll go in a little bit more about that. Today, 130,000 tons of Brazil nuts are sold annually from the indigenous communities that we work with. And Rebel sources some of those nuts to go directly into the drinks that they produce. A lot of those nuts are sold for mixed nuts to make Brazil nut butter, tons of other kind of wholesale products that go out there. But the biggest effect is that people like this Brazil nut harvester are able to work with dignity. They own their own supply chain. They're the ones taking care of the trees. They understand how the forest needs to be healthy in order to have these trees grow successfully. And we also got them organic certification and fair trade certification, so they could capture a better price for their nuts. So here's just a quick overview. Not for Sale facilitates the organic certification and the fair trade help. We do leadership training in the communities, and we also support some of the other communities locally that don't have Brazil nuts on their property. So these are communities that would not be able to go out and kind of do this on their own. Instead, they more heavily depend on the philanthropic dollars. So this is a good example of how the business world and the philanthropic world both have their own separate and important functions to kind of work in tandem. We need Rebel, the business, to be a successful business. Simultaneously, we need philanthropic dollars to continue to build up other communities that might not have access to the same kind of markets that the others do. So we build schools, clean water, small farms, fish farms. A lot of things that we're doing are kind of undoing the negative practices that have been going on in the Amazon for quite a while. The communities are empowered because of this. Like I said, they get higher prices for their nuts. They have more of a negotiating power. Since that first boat that we built them, they have since bought 2 more boats, and they named them themselves Not for Sale 2 and Not for Sale 3, or Not for Sale 2 y 3. And then there's also a lot of forestry management plans for the sustainable harvest of the Brazil nuts, because now both the communities and surrounding communities, including the government, understand that this is a valuable resource commercially and economically. And so there's much more of an interest in protecting it. Not for Sale created Rebel, and we created a market. So instead of trying to figure out what the market could be for a Brazil nut, we created one. We made this drink. We figured out a way to bring this to market. And this growing market creates the dignified, sustainable livelihoods for the harvesting communities. The continued empowerment is part of the 2.5% back to Not for Sale. Again, this can't happen without philanthropic efforts as well as commercial efforts. So it's really a two-handed effort that we're doing. And then I'll just finish by doing a real quick cap here of how this has actually helped the communities. It's an estimated 36 cents additional per kilogram of Brazil nuts that goes directly back to each family in these communities. And that is a massive amount there when you consider what the normal kind of monthly income is. That's quite a lot. That enables the communities to send their kids to school instead of sending them to work. They're able to buy medicine. They're able to go to town when they need to see doctors. It's been instrumental during COVID-19 because the communities are not as dependent on people coming to them. So they're much more isolated and therefore protected because they have their own farms. They've been able to stockpile their own supplies. They're much more in control of their own lives. There's the 3 boats that are now owned by the harvesters to transport the nuts up and down the river. And there's 451 families and over 2,000 indigenous people in this region that have benefited directly from the organic certification and the supply chain. And we are projecting, this is kind of a 2018 stat, but about 6,500 tons was the total production of Brazil nuts in the region. And here's, lastly, I'll leave you with this is the picture of a Rebel bottle, in case you may have seen it, the logo out there. If you turn it around the back, you'll see that the Not for Sale logo is also there.
Great. Terra, a couple quick questions for you before we open it up to everybody else. One, could you talk about the film? Terra and I got connected through a Nexus member, Gagan Jared Levy. And then secondly, what's the opportunity for scaling to among the 9 countries of the Amazon, those beyond Peru?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, in I think it was 2018, a couple years ago, we traveled to the Amazon to film a documentary on this because as I kind of tried to shoehorn right now, it's a pretty complicated, detailed story. As all things regenerative are, it's really hard to kind of slim it down into like a 5 bullet point tale. Nothing is that simple. Everything's complex. You know, the pathway we took to creating this drink and to creating this business was very zigzag, and it wasn't really a normal pathway of how businesses are built. There was a lot of false starts. There was a lot of kind of renew moments, a lot of pivots. You know, we started making this kind of like an herbal beverage that had cat's claw in it, and now it's like a thick, creamy coconut milk-based elixir that's very different than that because we realized cat's claw tastes terrible and the market won't support it. So, you know, we had to be very in tune with what the consumer wanted primarily, and then also make sure that we were committed to keeping our social promise in there as well, which is really difficult when you're working with so many different stakeholders who are expecting, you know, maybe profit at all costs. And we're like, no, 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 this is started by a nonprofit. That's the whole point of this. We have to keep that baked in there. So that's difficult. And that's why we created the documentary. We wanted people to see that this is such a multifaceted thing. We wanted people to see who the communities are and how they thought about this, because what they're really used to is people kind of coming down, building a school, maybe building a couple houses, and then leaving, and they're never going to see them again. And then they're stuck with like a school building that they have nothing else, you know, available to them to even use the school building. It ends up being like an empty shack, or someone moves into it or something. So one of the most special parts that we experienced when we were there filming the documentary was the chief of one of the communities coming out and thanking the Not For Sale CEO, David Batstone, and crying and presenting him with his own chief's uniform, because we have now been there for 12 years, and that is something that they've never seen before. And it was kind of the first moment when he said, we understand that you are actually walking with us, and that you actually have trust in us, and we actually have trust in you. And that's never happened before with anyone who's come to work there. So it's really hard to tell that story on the back of a bottle. So we wanted a movie to kind of give color and life to that, and to show these special moments, because you know, it's people, and it's the Amazon, it's the forest, and it's the world, and that's really hard to kind of to boil down into something so basic. So we're hoping that the film showed that, and kind of showed what like the true big complex story of this is. As far as expanding into other countries, that's a great question. We've thought about that a lot. You know, like I said, Rebel is created to be commercially appealing. If we don't have people buying it because it tastes good, then we won't have people buying it at all. If people bought it only because it helped the Amazon, they'd probably buy it once or twice. So we have to make sure that we're meeting market level standards. And so what that means is that we are balancing two different things. One is like making sure that we are including the ingredients that are going to make the best possible tasting product. But the other one is making sure that every single organization or group of people that we are sourcing from is doing the right thing, is ethical, is responsible, is committed to these sourcing standards. So that is, that's a tension. A lot of times those two things weigh on the same side. That's amazing. You know, like the Brazil nuts, that's great. It's good for the planet. It's good for the people who are harvesting them. It's great for the taste of the product. You know, all those three things align, but otherwise we have to make sure that they all kind of balance together. And that's really, really challenging. And I want to give big kudos to the sourcing team at Rebel for managing that process, because over 70 ingredients and trying to do cost, taste, and ethical considerations is really hard.
Great, thank you so much. Other questions? Feel free to just go ahead and ask or type it in the chat.
Hey, I want to thank you. This is Jody. I want to thank you for such a, it was a really great presentation. I remember when David was first working on Not For Sale, and he was doing a lot of work in Thailand, and really focused on young women who were at high risk of human trafficking or had been trafficked. And I wondered if you could just give a little bit of an update on the work around whether it's rescuing young women or programs to rehabilitate young women, and just what you're doing in that regard.
Yeah, for the Thailand project, about 15 years ago, and she was, here we go. Can you see me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was rescuing little children from brothels and casinos up there who were being sex trafficked for sex tourism. So what she was doing was just walking into these places and taking children out because she couldn't believe this was happening in her own country, which naturally upset many people because there's a lot of money invested in that kind of tourism. When Dave met her, she had just collected about 50 children and had no further plan on what to do at that point, but she just knew that she couldn't let them stay in these places. So he's like, okay, I'm promising you, I'm going to build you a home for them on this property. And like I said, that was 15 years ago. And now there's about 170 children there. It's an amazing place. We visit at least once a year, every year. This year, no, because of COVID. We want to keep everyone safe. But the kids are doing amazingly well. Most of the children are stateless. They come from the hill tribes in Burma, where they're not registered at birth. So they really have no citizenship of any country. Born in Burma, there's no opportunities there. They cross over into Thailand without paperwork. Then they're in Thailand, and Thailand is like, no, you're not a Thai person. And Burma's like, well, you're not a Burma person. So they're kind of just lost in this limbo. But Thailand has this amazing law where if a child graduates from university in Thailand, they can become a Thai citizen. And we have now successfully done that with 4 of the children that Kurnam has rescued in the last 15 years. And some of those children are now coming back to work at the home at Ban Kurnam, which is really spectacular. And the home is not like a typical orphanage. It really is a home. The children take care of each other. They love Kurnam. She brings their mothers in to live there as well if the mothers need help. Yeah, it's a really special place. It's exciting that you know about that, Jody, because that's kind of like our heartbeat of our organization is our relationship with Kurnam and helping those kids. Hopefully we'll do a documentary on that one someday too.
Great. Other questions?
While people are thinking of questions, I'll just add one thing there, which is that 2.5% from Rebel that goes back to Not for Sale doesn't just cover our work in the Amazon. It covers all of our overhead, 100% of Not for Sale's overhead. So my salary, our office space, our computers, everything it covers. So that means that every philanthropic dollar that comes in from a donor, every time someone goes to our website, donates $3, we promise that $3 goes directly to our projects. So it goes straight to Thailand and the kids, or it goes to Romania, or it goes to South Africa. Rebel enables us to have that freedom to be able to use the donor dollars the way the donor dollars should be spent. So in a way, we think of us creating Rebel as creating our own kind of revenue sourcing for ourselves. And then we're free to use donor dollars the way that they should be, which is going directly to the projects. And that's pretty spectacular. And we tell Rebel that all the time, like, hey, every single Rebel employee is responsible for every one of our project success. This is not a Peru story. This is a Peru origin story for their company, but that's not where it ends. The impact extends to every single one of our projects, which is really, really incredible.
I have a question. There are plenty of other sustainable products, not necessarily at the scale of acai or Brazil nuts, but many that could be brought to scale. Have you guys been approached to help bring other sustainable Amazon products to scale? You guys already have the brand, the marketing. I can imagine diversifying the offerings.
Yeah, that it's hard because one of the things that we've done this in a number of ways. Like, for example, we also have a brunch restaurant in Amsterdam that's hugely successful commercially. And what we really, really know, and what we are kind of trying to focus very specifically on, is stuff that's going to be very commercially successful, which means it has to be very high quality. The supply chain has to be reliable. We're not doing charity through business, right? Like, we are doing business well that's going to be able to propel the philanthropy that we want to do on the side. So we can't, like, for example, we've tried really, really, really hard to get a rubber supply chain off the ground from other communities in the Amazon. And it's been really, really tough, right? Like, to be totally honest, like, the quality is just not there. It's not going to be commercially successful if we bring it to market, which means that we've been kind of heading our nose to the grindstone, trying to figure out how to get it up to that level, injecting a lot of philanthropy dollars to get these communities to like be able to produce a certain level of rubber, and it's just not happening yet. So, you know, some are successful. The Brazil nut, awesome. The rubber, I don't know if it's going to be able to ever take off. And that's just kind of the nature of working within business with this, and it's really frustrating. Of course, we want every single community to have something that they can send to market like that, and for us to be able to kind of launch it in that way. But it's not always possible, and yeah, that's hard for us to know, like, how much time and attention and focus to put into developing something like that. What we've seen with the Brazil nut, which is super cool, is that the extra money that these communities are getting from that, and by owning their supply chain, they are now off and running with cacao. We have nothing to do with that. They're doing it 100% on their own. They're building a Brazil nut processing plant. Again, we have nothing to do with that. They're doing it all on their own. There was one other product that they were going to do as well that I can't think of right now, but it's another, it's like cacao. It's like the Brazil nut that they're doing totally on their own. So what we're seeing is like, okay, how do we go in and kind of be like the starter fuel of something that will work? And we know that we can like throw our strategic money behind to get it going. And then what we're seeing is the communities themselves are able to like launch that in a bunch of different directions, take the risks. They now understand how the development should go. Like, we've done the leadership training. There are people there that understand the cooperation components. They have the connections within the government as well. And they can just like go off and running with it.
Great.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Great.
To learn more about our mission and join the coalition, visit www.amazoninvestor.org. Remember to like, comment, and share.